everyone, this is Catrina the Cat, and today I will be reading you all Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs by the Grimm brothers. Now, my twin sister Lavinia read another fairy tale called Sleeping Beauty, which is her favorite fairy tale. Which is why I decided to actually read my favorite fairy tale, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, to be frankly honest, I actually like the 1939 animated movie, that's it, of Snow White. And after reading it, and after watching it, I wanted to read it so bad. And here I am today, reading you all my favorite fairy tale. Without wasting any more time, let's get reading. Once upon a time, in the middle of winter, when the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the sky, a queen sat at the window sewing, and the frame of the window was made of black ebony. And while she was sewing and looking out of the window at the snow, she pricked her finger with a needle, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. And the red looked pretty upon the white snow, and she thought to herself, "With that I have a child as white as snow, with lips as red as blood, and hair as black as the wood on the window frame." Soon after that, she had a little daughter, who was as white as snow, her lips were as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. She was therefore called Little Snow White, and when the child was born, the queen died. As a year had passed, the king took himself another wife. She was a beautiful woman, but proud and haughty, and she could not bear that anyone else should surpass her in beauty. She had a wonderful looking glass, and when she stood in front of it and looked at herself in it, it said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" The looking glass answered, "Thou, O queen, art the fairest of all." Then she was satisfied, for she knew that the looking glass spoke the truth. But Snow White was grown up, and grew more and more beautiful, and when she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as the day, and more beautiful than the queen herself. And once when the queen asked her looking glass, "Looking glass on the wall, who in the land is the fairest of all?" it answered, "Thou art fairer than all who are here, Lady Queen, but more beautiful still is Snow White, as I ween." Then the queen was shocked, and turned yellow and green with envy. For that hour, whenever she looked at Snow White, her heart heaved in her breast. She hated the girl so much, and envy and pride grew higher and higher in her heart, like a weed, so that she had no peace day or night. She called a huntsman and said, "Take the child away into the forest. I will no longer have her in my sight. Kill her, and bring me back her lung and liver as a token." The huntsman obeyed, and took her away. But when he had drawn his knife, and was about to pierce Snow White's innocent heart, she began to weep, and said, "Ah, dear huntsman, leave me my life. I will run away into the wild forest, and never come home again." And as she was so beautiful, the huntsman had pity on her, and said, "Run away then, you poor child. The wild beasts will soon have devoured you," thought he, "and yet It seemed as if a stone had been rolled from his heart, since it was no longer needful for him to kill her. And as a young bear just then came running by, he stabbed it and cut out its lung and liver and took them to the queen as proof that the child was dead. The cook had to salt them, and the wicked queen ate them and thought she had eaten the lung and liver of Snow White. But now the poor child was all alone in the great forest, and so terrified that she looked at all the leaves on the trees, and did not know what to do. Then she began to run, and ran over sharp stones and through thorns, and the wild beasts ran past her, but did her no harm. She ran as long as her feet would go until it was almost evening. Then she saw a little cottage and went into it to rest herself. Everything in the cottage was small, but neater and cleaner than can be told. There was a table on which was a white cover and 7 little plates, and on each plate a little spoon. Moreover, there were 7 little knives and forks and 7 little mugs. Against the wall stood 7 little beds side by side and covered with snow-white counterpanes. Little Snow White was so hungry and thirsty that she ate some vegetables and bread from each plate and drank a drop of wine out of each mug, for she did not wish to take all from one only. Then, as she was so tired, she laid herself down on one of the little beds, but none of them suited her. One was too long, another too short, but at last she found that the 7th one was just right. And so she remained in it, said a prayer, and went to sleep. When it was quite dark, the owners of the cottage came back. There were 7 dwarfs, who dug and delved in the mountains for ore. They lit their 7 candles, and as it was now light within the cottage, they saw that someone had been there, for everything was not in the same order in which they had left it. The first one said, "Who has been sitting on my chair?" The second, "Who has been eating off my plate?" The third, "Who has been taking some of my bread?" The fourth, "Who has been eating my vegetables?" The fifth, "Who has been using my fork?" The sixth, "Who would have been cutting with my knife?" The 7th, "Who has been drinking out of my mug?" Then the first looked around and saw that there was a little hollow on his bed, and he said, "Who has been getting into my bed?" The others came up and each called out, "Someone has been lying in my bed too." But the seventh, when he looked at his bed, saw little Snow White, who was lying asleep therein. And he called the others, who came running up, and they cried out with astonishment, and brought their 7 little candles and let the light fall on Snow White. "Oh heavens," cried they, "what a lovely child!" And they were so glad that they didn't wake her up, but let her sleep on in the bed. And the 7th dwarf slept with his companions 1 hour with each, and so passed the night. And this is where I will stop for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2 of Catrina the Cat reads Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs.